Hey everyone, it's Adam. I hope you guys are all doing amazing today. I want to drop by before the interview gets started and firstly say thank you so much to everyone who's been supporting us on our journey to kind of making this the best YouTube channel it can be. We have a long way to go, but we are definitely kind of making headway here. So thank you so much for the continued support. It's been very validating. It warms my heart, and I really, really appreciate the psychedelic community for embracing us. With that said, you can look at the analytics of the page, and we can tell that most of our viewers aren't actually subscribed. So I guess I'm chiming in here to ask if you guys enjoy the content. Just subscribe if you want to. It helps tremendously in terms of just getting our videos out to a wider audience and growing the channel, which is our main focus. So if you guys like the content, please subscribe. You guys can drop a like if you want. If you don't want to, it's not the end of the world. I would say if you like the content, like the video, it helps more than you guys realize. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you guys, and I hope you guys enjoy the upcoming interview.
You know, the way I understand it right now, Compass Pathways is looking to be third line treatment, TRD, or maybe someone failed even more than two options.
2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay. And I'm looking at Cybin Small Pharma. The way I'm seeing it, they're looking to be positioned as second line treatment when, someone's not responding completely to SSRIs. Now, I'm curious if there's any data that we have on depression, maybe any data we have on depression where someone is getting treated they're trying it for their first line is psilocybin or DMT. Like that's the first thing. Is there any data out there on that?
Not only anecdotal.
Yeah, anecdotal for sure.
Wow, that's really interesting. Okay.
Really, but I have an opinion on why Compass started this way and why maybe slightly different Cybin and Small Pharma is going after MDD. I mean, eventually everyone, unfortunately, unfortunately, we'll probably get to the second, third, and fourth line because these are the crappy drugs that we have right now.
Okay.
It's a blessing if you respond to your first antidepressant and you could stay on it for a prolonged period of time, but it's very unusual. So people will get there. Traditionally, the low-hanging fruit where you could rise above placebo treatment or control treatment is those who are most heavily pre-treated, because you would think that there is no placebo response there. They've tried 4 different things. Nothing worked. They don't just get suddenly an agent and, wow, this is something different. Because unfortunately, they are long into their journey of depression at this, 20 years later or 30 years later. The other argument for going closer to the upfront is shown by USONA. Maybe a month ago, they published results from about 100 patients. The signal size, the impact of psilocybin in the MDD population, so second line, just like Compass is pursuing, is so much larger. The improvement is so much larger than if you look at a more heavily treated population. And not to mention the fact that there are 5 to 10 times as many people in the earlier setting, opposed to the heavily pre-treated and refractory population. So there's a market argument. There is a easier comparison to placebo argument going for it's almost very analogous to, this is what happens in cancer. They go for the salvage patients usually first, and then they walk back. But what the USONA data told me immediately, that Compass, the path to second line depression is wide open for Compass. So while they are not going to get the initial label as MDD, second line, but with some more work, not another set of phase 3 programs, but maybe one trial, they could show that they could move up front. So eventually, most of these companies will find themselves in the second line. And the reason why, for for the foreseeable future, psilocybin is not going to be upfront treatment, because a generic SSRI to try, it's going to be cheaper. So they'll go through that routine, spend 3 months on something that is not working, and then come in for the kill, hopefully, figuratively speaking.
I see.
Yeah, really interesting. So this kind of anyway, sorry. In regards to the dosage of DMT that they're using for the intravenous administration. So I don't know. I'm very well versed when it comes to like how you would dose out when you're smoking DMT, inhaling DMT, whatnot. I don't know how this translates to intravenous, but my assumption is that you would typically need less intravenous than you would if you're doing inhaled. So from like with DMT specifically, I guess the around, let's say 15 to 25 milligrams and even 10 to 25 milligrams, right? Between there is usually what will elicit a breakthrough, super mystical experience. It's different for everyone, but that's kind of that threshold, right? I noticed with the intravenous injection infusion, they're doing 25 milligrams. That seemed really high. When you're considering the bioavailability of intravenous. So I was just I don't know, that just stood out to me when I was looking at the trial. I don't know if that means anything, but I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, they were very empirical and methodical about this, because they gave rising doses to healthy volunteers first and looked at the mystical experience scale. And once they reached that plateau range and there is no side effects that would prevented them using this 25 milligram killer dose, they decided again to get the best out of the very first trial, meaning IV and a high dose, so they could see what is there. And once you see that you have a 92% remission rate, you can dial that dose down in a subcutaneous or an intramuscular setting, and you still probably get to something similar, because the mystical experience, as you said, is probably there at the 10 milligram dose. Or for some people, it's already there. Some may need 15. But whatever the dose, in which we don't know, the injectable dose is going to be, again, it's very empirical. Did they get the peak experience? And then what is the clinical benefit? And we don't know what that is going to be. Obviously, the bioavailability at the same dose level is going to be less with a subcutaneous dose, as opposed to, or not necessarily less, but it may be delayed. The drug has to go through different tissues before getting into the bloodstream.
So I guess, yeah, to build on what you just said, I guess if you were to kind of like give your outlook in regard, we sitting here, we can all agree intravenous administration of a drug that's the gold standard, right? You're going to get the best results from that. So now we're moving on to subcutaneous or intramuscular for DMT. When you're looking at that and I guess speculating, do you see any kind of roadblocks that might be there?
The clear example that it's not a slam dunk is failed experiment by Lusaris. They wanted to have a buccal formulation of 5-MeO DMT, so going through the inner cheek, and obviously they didn't get to the blood levels that was desired to reach that peak experience that you get with inhalation. So it's not trivial. That's why it's ideal not that they have two different methodologies, two different routes to test. But on
Yes.
the other hand, when you look at what produces a peak experience with the IV dose, you'll get to a plateau level that several doses will get you to that level, including the one that they tested. So there is room to fall back before losing at least the mystical component of it. But then they have to carry on and observe it in patients. Did that do anything bad to the antidepressant effect? Or is it just as good as the IV? Maybe they have to push the dose a little bit higher. It may take longer for the experience to develop and then peak and then come down from it. But this is what they're going to experiment. Not it's doable, but it's not risk-free.
My next question is, so in regards to Cybin and small pharma, now them becoming Cybin, obviously, so the acquisition. Everyone's excited about it. They're really like, oh, look at this, the pipeline now. Well, we got the DMT and all this, whatever. But I feel like in general, there's so much more value here that people are missing. If you kind of are looking at this, where do you see kind of this acquisition kind of positioning Cybin now in regards to the psychedelic sector at large?
Yeah. I mean, I used an example in a previous podcast, which I need to correct. The combined valuation of Cybin, Compass, GH Research, Mind Medicine, the big ones, is somewhere in the order of $1.5 billion.
That's crazy.
If you don't look at Cybin in isolation, but I'll give you a comp for Cybin as well. Exome, which Jake refers to Auvelity,
Yes.
the drug that was launched, it's essentially a combination of existing drugs.
Mhm.
9 months ago, is valued at $4 billion.
Oh,
They have a pipeline, but the majority of that valuation is due to this newly launched drug, which is fast acting. You know what fast acting means there? It gets its maximal effect over a 4 to 6 week period,
mm,
not within days, 4 to 6 weeks. This
yeah.
is the competitive advantage that a $4 billion company has right now in the field of depression. Now go back to Cybin. You remember that GH Research, which I love, 5-MeO-DMT, but their current valuation, which is pushing $500 million, is supported by 8 patients worth of data, 7 of whom went into remission,
Yep.
which lasted 7 days. It's possible that it lasted longer, but they only observed 7 days today. Compare that to what small pharma has, and you'll be able to compare that to what Cybin will have in October in a controlled trial in the MDD indication. So the combined company is probably worth now maybe 150 to 200 million if you were to use them at today's valuation, as opposed to 500 million with something that is yet to produce durable data, probably sometimes during the next 1 to 2 years. So the space as an aggregate has a lot more to grow. And when you compare, say, Cybin to GH Research, or once Cybin is in a phase 3 trial with CYB3, you could start comparing them to Compass Pathways, which is also about a $450 million company. So the sector in aggregate is tremendously undervalued. And if you look at tease out some comparisons between, I think Cybin and small pharma are way undervalued. And I haven't even given you a net present value calculation for the MDD indication, which will get to crazy numbers eventually once the market recovers and people will appreciate this sector and what it can do even further.
Why is no one deuterating DMA, or at least no one that I know of is actively deuterating DMA? It's possibly Cybin is. Jake was talking about that. We were talking about that earlier.
Yeah, sorry. So CYB5, I know I think they're not really focusing on that right now. They have enough to handle with their 2 lead programs, and they will need funding for that, which I'm personally betting that I think they will get it. We'll see. But CYB5, which is at the they say it's their phenethylamine drugs. So that encompasses, so MDMA is a phenethylamine. So I was guessing, so Elemer, are they perhaps deuterating MDMA with CYB5?
They're fairly tight-lipped about it. And obviously, as you know, ATI has a modified MDMA program. So people are not sitting on their hands. One possible modification is deuteration, and there are many others. And deuteration itself doesn't necessarily guarantee a very different pharmacokinetic profile, how quickly it gets into the system. So not every molecule, again, similar to the delivery method, buccal or sublingual, it doesn't necessarily guarantee success just because you deuterate something. And so it's in the mix. It's interesting that both independently, both small pharma and Cybin, thought about deuterating DMT, and they built a complementary IP estate, which is completely non-overlapping. That's why it makes sense to fuse this estate together with DMT. And if you think about DMT modification, it's over. I mean, they own the field as far as deuteration goes.
Companies are filing IP on stuff they're not even working on. Something I kind of only learned maybe 6 months ago. So
welcome to biotech, Jake.
Yeah, no, I'm very new to this. So is part of the do you think Cybin and Small Pharma combining their IP, they may be looking out to license things out in the future? Is that part of the value creation here?
Or, it's a protective move. You work on one single molecule, but you want to list all the combinations that you could think of under the same patent, so no one can penetrate that moat that you build. Licensing a molecule that is very close to or in the same family as what you're working on doesn't make sense for either Cybin or whoever wants to license it. Because, this is exactly why Small Pharma and Cybin had to get together, because if they were both going on a parallel track with CYB3 or CYB4 and SPL028, sooner or later they would bump into who wants to have my drug if someone else is also in clinical development with something that is very similar.
But even with different indications, even because they were going after different indications.
It's true, but you can always add. So you can't, just because you start with anxiety, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't move on to depression 2 years later and now there's a perfect overlap. Or anxiety and depression has this very overlapping set of patients that suffer from both. So you immediately have, you're treating some depression patients, even though you have anxiety as on the label. So I think the best idea is to keep it, separate it, own the space, and then keep it to yourself. And the reason why, let's suppose CYB028 SPLA28, I'm thinking already the combined entity, runs into some trouble. I don't know what. Think of anything. They have some candidates to fall back on, which is IP protection.
I was saying this in a video the other day with Adam, actually. Yes.
Yeah. So it makes sense to have a repertoire,
Yeah.
just in case anything happens, you know.
Do you think the mindset acquisition by Otsuka and now this now the Cybin and small pharma news, do you think this is more or less signaling that the psychedelic sector has pretty much bottomed out and we're kind of due to course correct at some point soon? I know it's hard to say, but
yeah,
we're speculating here.
Yeah, yeah, I wish. But it goes beyond that. Think about the MAPS data. If you think about the preliminary CPT code being available, if you think about draft guidance by the FDA, if you think about the Compass Pathways transaction and the investors who came in there, and if you tackle on the mindset acquisition, the merger between Cybin and small pharma, God forbid, institutional interest in the combined company, putting in money, as exemplified by point 72, maybe 2 weeks ago. You would think that these are the ingredients of some sort of a bottom or a trigger of further interest. I mean, these companies were, when you combine them, they were worth, during the mania, during the hype, probably $8 to $10 billion. Now they're worth 1.5 billion, and we have a ton of clinical data to chew on. I mean, we just spent the first 30 minutes on one little slide from a small experiment. We had MAPS data, the Compass data, the Cybin data is coming up. We didn't have any of this 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago.
Very true.
So fundamentally, I think we are in so much better shape that you just can't tell. I mean, it's very difficult to compare because we are so much more advanced.
And this is the last question for me. In regard, so you know how Compass has IP for Comp360, we have the crystalline ridge, right? Mm-hmm. The polymorph, what is it, polymorph A? So what's preventing another company from trying the same thing once again with MDMA?
And I mean, even MAPS will tell you, or you hear some statements that they're trying to innovate around the structure, or their very limited protection, of which is only 5 years after approval, market exclusivity. So I wouldn't be surprised if they have something in the background working on some sort of an analog crystal version. And there are some other companies that are working. ATI is one example. There are very similar molecules to MDMA. I think it's one of them is called methylone. You've probably heard more about it.
Yep.
There's a private company that is pursuing it, which is very similar to in terms of its effect on PTSD, perhaps. So work is ongoing. A lot of it until it is published by the USPTO, which is probably 1.5 years to 2 years after they filed the patents, is just not known to us because it's going through the process. And slowly, as you know, some of the small pharma not small pharma, mindset pharma patents and the reunion patents came to life, and it turned out to be that both has protection for the same molecule. We just don't know. But there are some signs that, even MAPS is thinking about expanding there.
Oh, that's really, really interesting. I'm not surprised.
When you look at these results from small pharma, are you surprised?
The strength of the results?
Yes.
I mean, it was surprising that there was an improvement over what I was hoping, or what I was expecting, is that not much difference between the two groups, and there is no safety signal. That would be the base case, in my mind. That the fact that you kept people stable on their antidepressants and you get to this 90+% remission rate under those conditions, I think it's just surprising and surprisingly positive. Yeah. I mean, think about it. The closer we get to 100%, if you tinker with the formulation, tinker with whatever the dose, there is room to fall down and it's still awesome.
Yes.
I mean, that's incredible, actually. You're right.
Yeah, I mean, these results that are coming out are incredible. I think sooner or later people won't be able to ignore it anymore, although we'll see what happens. I'm very optimistic about the future of these companies. And Elemer, I'd like to thank you so much for coming on. We're really spoiled to have you on the channel to be able to explain these results to our viewers and help kind of educate people about like kind of how crazy the potential of these drugs are to treat depression. And thank you so much for coming on. If you guys like this video, please like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next video.